Terrific. Welcome, everyone, to the fourth event in the Aspetuck Land Trust Lunch and Learn series. We're delighted to welcome today's speaker, Peter Reid, Outreach Coordinator for Wildlife in Crisis, joining us from Weston. And he'll be sharing some of the really important ways we can make our landscape more welcoming to wildlife, especially as we are here in spring and everything is waking up. So my name is Jean Stutz-Bachelski, and I'll be moderating today's lecture. But before we begin, just want to go over the visual communication platform we're using today. It's called Zoom. For people who are familiar with it, you realize that there are tools at the bottom of the screen we will be utilizing. For those unfamiliar with Zoom, you move your cursor right to the bottom of the screen and you can see a Q&A control and a chat. We'll be utilizing both of these today. We will not be using the raise hand feature. So we'll be taking questions throughout the presentation, and Peter and Mel will answer these questions at the end. We're going to leave about 20 minutes or so for Q&A. So please do enter your questions in either the Q&A or chat. And with that, I'd like to introduce Mary Ellen LeMay. She's the Director of Landowner Engagement for Aspetuck Land Trust, to kick off our program. Hello, Mel.
Great. Hi, Jean. Thank you very much. I wanted to thank Jean, especially for her continued support with these Lunch and Learn Zooms. As moderator and Zoom master, Jean's expertise has been so valuable to us, and she is a longtime Aspetuck Land Trust volunteer and helper and executive leadership coach with her company, Individual Differences. So I really appreciate her taking her lunch hour out to moderate these for us. We are so excited to have Peter Reid from Wildlife in Crisis here today to talk to us about the roles that we each can play in our lives and in our landscape to make the world more welcoming for species that share the planet with us. For some of you that are members of the Aspetuck Land Trust, you are familiar with our Green Corridor initiative, where we're encouraging people to make connections across the landscape by supporting land protection and land stewardship. And what we do in our yards is the stewardship piece. And it has a far greater impact than we realize. We're encouraging people to not use pesticides, to plant native plants, to help to improve biodiversity, and to rethink our lawns, make them sustainable. And by doing some simple steps, we can make our properties stepping stones on the Green Corridor. And the team at Wildlife in Crisis is such an integral part of helping us to improve biodiversity by what they do. What they do is quite incredible. They have provided us with a wonderful capstone video, which I'm going to show you now, about the work that they do and how we can make wildlife safer. By saving and reintroducing our wildlife, it is helping to increase biodiversity in our region. And the education that they provide for us, especially now in spring, is critical to inspiring us to help make a difference both locally and regionally. So if you will bear with me, I will begin the video, which is excellent. All right. Here. Share sound and share. Okay. And here we go.
Wildlife in Crisis is an oasis for over 5,000 injured and orphaned animals each year, encompassing over 200 species, all of whom require specialized care. Proper diets and housing are provided for all, regardless of cost. All species of native wildlife are accepted, from the tiniest hummingbird to white-tailed deer and everything in between. Wildlife in Crisis has an indoor clinic with incubators and other specialized housing and over 50 outdoor habitats. There are dangers and obstacles everywhere for wildlife. Fences, trash, netting, tree removal, excavation, gardening, housing, and roadways can destroy the animal's natural habitat. Wildlife in Crisis receives thousands of patients a year who have been hit by cars or orphans of those hit. Poisons are a constant source of illness. Pesticides, rodenticides, fertilizers, and heavy metals affect birds, mammals, reptiles, and amphibians. Cruelty is also a serious threat to animals, as teenagers shoot them with pellet and BB guns, kids throw rocks at them, people start fires in fireplaces to evict them, and even set fire to animals like raccoons caught in various types of traps. What can we do to protect wildlife? Get involved with your local land trust and work to keep every bit of precious remaining open space in your community. Greenways are the key to wildlife preservation, and every little bit helps. Leave trees on your property standing, as even dead trees provide food and housing for wildlife. Supervise your dogs and cats for their safety as well as the safety of wildlife. Free-roaming cats and dogs wreak havoc on vulnerable animals. Songbird populations are plummeting as cats kill billions of them worldwide each year. Don't use toxic pesticides. They kill songbirds and other wildlife, and eventually us. Don't use rodenticides. The mice and rats eat the poison, and then the predators eat the poison rats and die. We see many ill birds of prey who are the victims of rodenticide. Don't trap wildlife. Even so-called humane traps should not be used. Each year we receive hundreds of orphaned baby raccoons, squirrels, skunks, woodchucks, and others because someone trapped their mother. Act locally, think globally. There are many things we're doing as a species that are unsustainable. Consider the products you use and how they affect wildlife and our planet as a whole. Think about driving less or owning a fuel-efficient or electric car. Reuse, reduce, recycle. Plastic and other trash is killing the planet. Factory farming is cruel, unsustainable, and the methane produced is a major contributor to climate change. Switching to a plant-based diet will make you healthier while saving countless animals. Refrain from using palm oil, as its production is destroying the rainforest. And please don't wear fur or down garments for obvious reasons. Keeping a small footprint can make a big difference for the Earth and all of its inhabitants.
There you go. That is a great video. And thank you for sharing it with us. I would like to actually put that on our Aspetuck Land Trust website so people can look at it again. And that being said, this program is going to be recorded today. So we will also be putting this on our website with all of our other Lunch and Learns. So without further ado, I would love to introduce our friend Peter Reid from Wildlife in Crisis. And Peter, you can take it away. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Peter from Wildlife in Crisis. Thanks for joining us today. I'll speak a little bit about us and our mission. Some of you may be familiar with the organization. We're a wildlife rescue and rehabilitation center located in Weston. My wife, Dara, is a wildlife biologist. She founded the organization in 1989. And we care for thousands of orphaned and injured animals every year. And these slides just show a little bit about us, our facility. We're the largest rescue and rehabilitation facility in the state and handle all native species. So from hummingbirds to black bear cubs. Here's a picture of one of our flight cages. You can kind of see in the back perch there, those are all barred owls. So the most common mid-sized owl we have in this area. Often struck by cars. The roadside is basically edge habitat. As many of you know, edge habitat is very attractive to rodents, insects, and so it's a hunting ground. That's why in the Merritt Parkway, you always see these hawks swooping down towards the edge of the road. They're targeting a rodent. And the owls and hawks often struck by cars. I'd say probably 80% of our owl and hawk patients are car strike victims. Sometimes basic concussion, sometimes fractures, but very common. So our mission is to care for these animals. We often bring them in as babies in the spring. We call the spring baby season. That's why this is a good time to have this presentation, because all species are reproducing this time of year. So right now you've got fox and coyote denning up. Squirrel babies are starting to be born. We got our first call about baby raccoons the other day. And so it's a timely presentation. Here's a slide about injured animals, various species. and gives you a kind of cross section of the animals we deal with. Baby birds, big issue in the springtime. And living harmoniously with wildlife can mean putting off certain things. Tree removal in the spring is problematic. Time to remove a tree, probably fall. You know, you have fewer species. You know, once the last bird nesters have exited, you may have some squirrels nesting as well, but tree removal best, better to hold off until the fall. Spring cleanups are a big problem. Just because you got a bunch of guys out there with leaf blowers, they're removing all the duff and leaf matter. You've got newts and salamanders, toads under there. This is an important time for all these species because they're, you know, obviously reproducing, and that leaf matter creates a damp environment, which is home to a lot of these species as they reproduce. So be careful with spring cleanups. We've got the slide show continuing. So if a baby bird falls out of its nest, you can touch it, you can put it back in the nest. It's a myth that the mother will reject it. That is true of some mammal species, but birds, if you find a little baby bird in the ground, see if you can find the nest. If you can, replace the bird. And sense of smell. If no nest is visible and you have a baby bird, you can attempt to re-nest them, placing a basket on a branch. In some cases is effective, some species. Ideally, find the original nest is best. And if you can't find a nest and it's not practical to hang a basket, you just call us. We raise many baby birds. These are images of pileated woodpecker, came in as a baby. It's another issue with tree removal this time of year. So people are cutting down these trees, and these cavity nesting birds can be dehoused. Are you hearing me okay?
Peter, you're just fine. You're coming through loud and clear.
Okay, thank you. This is a pileated. There are big, dramatically large woodpeckers that you're hammering a tree. They're cavity nesters. So we've had so many instances where people chop down a tree and they'll bring us a limb and it'll have 6, 7, 8 baby woodpeckers in it. And, you know, we can raise them, but it's better to be aware that the cavity is there. You know, if you have in spring, if you have a tree with a cavity in it, someone's going to be utilizing it as a home. So the best thing to do, and unfortunately tree surgeons, is kind of it's part of their job to remove the tree. So they're going to tell you need to remove a tree, but it's a great idea to have someone climb up or go up in a lift truck and look for any cavities. Right now, this time of year, we've got owls, like screech owls, nesting in cavities. And soon we'll have birds like this, woodpeckers nesting in cavities. And it's, raccoons nest in cavities, squirrels, obviously. So it's a great idea just to check if you're looking at a tree, and dead trees, if they can be left in place, are great habitat for animals, particularly the birds. And if it's not going to endanger a structure when it falls, it's great to leave up as many dead trees as you can. May seem counterintuitive, but it's really helpful for the wildlife. The dead trees attract a lot of insects, which in turn attract the birds. They usually have a lot of cavities in them, so it's if possible, you can leave them in place. Another big thing that we're going to see in May and June is the fawns. So these white-tailed deer are having their babies. They will leave the babies alone initially because the fawns are too frail to forage. You will often find a fawn, assume it's abandoned, grab it, pick it up, take it home, sit on it with the couch and pet it. And during that process, they're leaving all kinds of scent on the baby. And so if you attempt to return the fawn at that point, the mother may reject it because she's confused by all the human scent. So if you see a fawn, definitely leave it. Certainly, typically past nightfall, that's when the mother's most likely to retrieve the fawn. But we get, 15, 20 orphan fawns every year. 30% of them might not actually be orphans. People have seen them, picked them up, brought them home. So it's very important to call somebody about the situation, consult with them before you grab a fawn. They're very cute. It's human impulse, just grab them up, but refrain from doing so. Another myth is about raccoons. Spring, early summer, very common to see raccoons out and about. These are mother raccoons foraging for food. A healthy raccoon will move with a purpose. They're out there foraging for food, so they'll be walking a straight line. They'll be alert. There are raccoons that suffer viral infections like distemper, rabies, and they'll manifest signs of neurological distress, like difficulty walking, tremors, unnatural behavior. Next myth is about bats and rabies. 99% of bats don't have rabies. It's bat populations are plummeting due to white nose fungus, which is almost annihilated some bat populations in New England. We probably lost 10 million bats in the last decade. And this is a fungus, soil fungus that gets into the hibernaculums or caverns where they live. The fungus was a soil fungus from Europe. Cavers brought this in when they were exploring caves, and it's throughout New England, southern Canada. The first case popped up in the Pacific Northwest a couple of summers ago, also probably transferred by humans. So it's pernicious. The bats become dehydrated. This fungus kind of covers their respiratory membranes, and you'll see the white powdery substance on the wings. It dehydrates them and ultimately kills them. So bats are huge allies in that keeping mosquito populations down. So it's very disturbing that the bats are being decimated. Cats. Outdoor cats may kill 1 to 2 billion songbirds a year. They have probably a more negative effect on songbird populations than even pesticides. And that's saying a lot. So many little birds come into our facility that have been attacked by cats. And the injuries are puncture wounds, feather damage. Some of them are eviscerated. And cats do best inside. There are a number of predators that prey upon cats outside now. Now, these predator populations are surging, so the danger to cats outside is very real. Great horned owls, fishers, coyotes, etc. All prey upon cats. These little guys, migratory birds, this is a big time for them to be returning to our area. We had an incident a couple of winters ago when the woodcock came back early, and there was still snow on the ground. They were worm eaters. You can see this guy's eating mealworms. Their favored worm is like an earthworm, but we had like 20, 30 of these guys in our basement that year because they came back too early, and hundreds of them were dying in Fairfield County because they couldn't find any food. So that's kind of a climate change issue, but grass is also very vulnerable to cats. So there's a cute little guy. Keeping cats indoors. A great thing that people have done is a catio, C-A-T-I-O. You can look on Google Images and see a whole bunch of these catios. And it's usually have a cat door or window, opens up to a screened enclosure, but they can be quite elaborate. And it allows the cat, it satisfies their impulse to go outside and keeps them safe and keeps wildlife safe. So it's something to look into. If you have a cat that really has got to be outside, look into a catio. It's better for the cats, better for nature. Birds fly into windows all the time. It's they're flying along, they see the plate glass and they get a reflection of the sky and the clouds and the trees. They think it's a continuation of the natural world. They hit head on, often suffer concussion. And it can resolve in minutes or hours, sometimes needs a couple of days. So often if you leave him for a few minutes, he'll just sit up. And if he's upright, that's a good sign. And then sometimes just fly away. You can accelerate recovery from concussion by putting him in a box, just a simple cardboard box, punch some holes in it for airflow. Dark, quiet, warm environment for a couple of hours. Often they'll recover at that point. If they don't, call us. That's just continuation of that. Hawk silhouettes are pretty effective at preventing birds from hitting windows. You can get these prefabricated. I saw some great ones on Etsy, and they're made of contact paper. Just put them up on the upper portions of big plate glass windows, and often cause little birds to shear off when they see that distinctive silhouette. There's also a product called Window Alert. They're UV sensitive, kind of press-on stickers, and they seem to work. It shows the birds that that plate glass window is another dimension. Here's a bird nest. Again, if they can be re-nested, great. If not, call us. We're talking about the basket again. If you find a fledgling, and this would be a fully feathered juvenile bird, often hopping around the ground, you want to stand back and watch for a bit. Certain species, the birds will fledge and they'll be on the ground for sometimes days, robins for a prolonged period. And you just want to watch and see if an adult bird is flying down to this fledgling, and a little bit beak to beak, and that would mean that the parent is feeding the baby. And if that phenomenon is taking place, you just step back, let the parent feed the baby on the ground, and often they'll be fine. And if you're in doubt, call us. Baby squirrels fall out of the nest all the time. Squirrels are perhaps the worst nest builders in nature. Those little twig and leaf nests you see up in the trees have a lot of voids. The babies often fall down. The mother will make an effort to retrieve those babies. So you don't necessarily have to grab them up initially. You can move them wearing latex gloves or a cloth, move them to the base of the tree. The mother will often come down and retrieve that baby. If that doesn't happen over the period of like 6-7 hours, give us a call. Rabbit nests, we're already getting calls about this. A rabbit nest is typically a scrape in the ground. The mother lines it with her own fur and some leafy, grassy material. So have our babies. It's sometimes in the middle of a yard, and sometimes it's in a yard with dogs. And the rabbits seem to locate nests in that place because the dogs are less of a threat than natural predators. So in those cases, leave the nest as is. If the nest is destroyed, you can, reconstitute it. In some cases, if you have dogs, you can put a circle of wire around the nest. So the heavy gauge gardening wire, like maybe 3-foot radius around the nest. You want about 3 feet high. You can cut little apertures around the base to allow the mother to come in and out. And that's often successful protecting a nest from a dog. We get 100 calls about this every month. So leaving the nest as it is best. I had a woman call me the other day. She had this nest in her yard, rabbit nest, and she was going out and taking the materials out of the nest because she didn't want, her dog to get the babies. But it's better to allow, we're trying to live in harmony with the natural world, better to allow the rabbit to complete building the nest. And then you can take protection measures, wire around the nest. If it's an emergency, if the dog has just dug up the nest, just put a recycling bin over it until you can get wire to protect the nest. The mother only comes back at night, so you have a few hours to take protection measures for the rabbit nest. We get so many calls of deer hit by cars. It's a daily event in Fairfield County, sometimes multiple events. Unfortunately, the adult deer are not candidates for rehabilitation in the sense we can't tranquilize them, take them to a wildlife hospital, fix the leg. If the deer is moving, able to get up and move off, we recommend just leaving them be. They can get around on 3 legs. It's certainly not ideal. But sometimes it's a simple fracture which will heal in time. So if the deer can't get up, if it's struggling, can't rise, probably a broken hip or pelvis, and in those cases you recommend euthanasia. The police will come out and euthanize by gunshot. It's an unfortunate reality that that's probably the best situation, best response to that situation. So get lots of calls about animals in houses, garages, chimneys. Most common species that nest in attics would be gray squirrels, flying squirrels, or raccoons. And you can kind of tell who is who by the kind of noise, the thumps they make as they move around. There are methods of encouraging them to vacate without trapping. Trapping is the least humane option. There's really no such thing as humane trapping. Even if they remove the live animal from the area, they're just going to dump it somewhere. And a lot of these guys just euthanize animals they trap anyway. So if you're encouraging say nesting raccoon to leave from an attic, you can use a radio on a talk radio station, a little ammonia on a rag put up in the attic. They don't like bright lights. If there are lights up there, turn it on. So light, noise, noxious odor, those 3 methods will often cause an animal to vacate, look for a more favorable nesting location. If you can, allow the animal to finish birthing their babies, stay for a month or 2, that's great. We typically do that because this is our line of work, and we're particularly I'm sorry about that. We want these animals can leave under their own power, take their own babies. The babies can often follow them, and then they're able to find new habitat, new place to live, and they're not just being removed and dumped somewhere where their chances of survival are very low. Once the animal's exited, you can get someone to do remediation. So holes or gaps in the walls, chimney caps are an option. But there's a few contractors. The one we like best is probably All About Bats and Wildlife in Norwalk. One thing about the chimney caps is it prevents access from this species, which is an endangered, threatened migratory bird called the chimney swift. They love chimneys. And kind of mid-late summer, a lot of people start calling us about noise in the chimneys. And it's kind of a ratchety noise. People assume it's bats or some other species. It's almost always these guys. They nest in little kind of twig and spit nests on the side of a masonry chimney. The mother flies down the chimney to feed them, so not trapped. She flies in, and they're in there for typically we get our first calls about that in July, certainly through August into September, and then they fly to Chile and they leave the area. So don't damage the chimney. They can't get into the house. This is a species that's declining, but still in some numbers in this area. So if you hear this strange noise in your chimney, just call us. We're happy to explain what you can do. There's another picture of a swift. We raise a lot of these guys because people like pull them out of chimneys. People think they're bats. They'll start a fire and burn them out, which is horrific. This is something we run into all the time. Raccoons, particularly in spring, the mother will lead her babies to find food. She'll lead them all into a dumpster. Very simple to put a big branch on the side of the dumpster, and they're very good climbers, so they'll clamber right out. If you happen to cut down a tree and there are babies in it, best thing to do is put the babies in a box by the base of the tree. A raccoon, for example, will come back and retrieve those babies after dark. And it's unfortunately very common. That's a baby squirrel. Again, try and avoid cutting down trees in the spring. It's a big issue. As I said, best to wait till fall. Keep cats indoors. Dogs can be kind of pernicious in spring, chasing wildlife, because these animals often have their babies. So keep your dog on a lead if possible, particularly when walking in the woods. And one of our favorite local organizations is Pollinator Pathway. There's a group in the Northeast. And we have most of the towns in Fairfield County now have a chapter. And it's a great thing to, the idea is to create these interlinked habitats. And as a homeowner, you can create this habitat in your yard. So water source, food source, blossoming, flowering plants. No matter what size your yard is, you can create suitable habitat for these animals. This slide is talking about holding off on spring cleanups. Just send a bunch of landscaping guys out there with leaf blowers. They're going to blow off that leaf matter, and you've got salamanders and newts and toads, larval insects like butterflies. All of that's destroyed when you blow off that leaf matter. So, it's great to preserve part of that in your yard, if possible, and rakes are better than leaf blowers, obviously, but leaving some of that leafy duff certainly into early summer is very beneficial to a lot of species. Rodenticide, big thing now. Rodent populations on the rise because we have milder winters. People are putting out rodenticide, these little dispenser boxes. Little rodent goes in. We've got raptors, we've got canids like fox, bobcat. They find a little rodent, eat it, and it's like a little time bomb in their system. So if it's an anticoagulant like warfarin or something, the predator would then bleed out inside. So we get all these hawks, owls, and they have consumed a rodent with rodenticide, and it kills them. A lot of possums, this happens to too, because possums eat carrion. They'll find a mouse that's got poison in its system, just a carcass, they'll eat it, kills them too. We had a sad case a few years ago where a woman, an ardent conservationist, was bringing us these little baby foxes that were spastic, just kind of having seizures and then dying. And she was very puzzled. Turned out her handyman was putting out rat poison just in an open tray. And this entire fox family was wiped out by rodenticide, a great tragedy. And it's something we like to avoid. So rodenticide really should not be outside in any form. We much prefer using, a lethal solution is the old-fashioned spring trap inside your home. And you can get humane traps, which will allow you to relocate the rodent. And feel free to call us if you have questions about this stuff. That's a little baby juvenile barred owl. The owls are nesting now. So these guys start to turn up. If you find an owl that's out of the nest, give us a call. In some cases, they can be re-nested. You'll often see the parent flying around when you find a baby owl on the ground. They're quite vulnerable to predators. So in some cases, they have to be rescued. But if you can find the nest, they can be re-nested in many cases. A few things, just like we talked about, leave trees standing. Trees are so important to wildlife. The oaks, chestnuts, they generate biomass. Nuts these animals can eat. Never trap and remove wildlife. Humane trapping is not an accurate term. When you trap and remove animals, and even if you relocate them typically starve. People often will trap and relocate the mother, not realizing they're babies, and they'll starve to death somewhere. And this is particularly true of raccoons and woodchucks, the species that are most commonly trapped and relocated. And so if the mother woodchuck is relocated, she's got half a dozen babies down her burrow that are going to starve to death. So give us a call. We'll try and offer some humane solution. Closing up entry holes, generally a good idea. Some animals are trying to nest right now, so the squirrels and the raccoons, but it's a good thing late winter to kind of looking for points of access that may be a problem. Just be alert. This is a time when wild animals are out and about, particularly early mornings. The early morning commuters, the people who are headed for work at 5 or 6 a.m., seem to hit a lot of these animals because they're blasting along the roads. It's dark, and it's very tragic to see the carnage on the roads. Be aware of waterfowl. There's a time of year soon anyway when you have like little families of ducks crossing the road. And I'm always amazed how often commuters will just blast through a family of ducks, killing the mother ducklings. And it's, we raise 50, 60 baby ducklings every spring. And it just, if that kind of incident can be avoided, just be aware. Owls often struck by cars. I think we discussed that. This guy has a damaged eye from car strike. They'll swoop down. Often you're driving at night, you'll see something kind of swooping over your headlights. That's an owl. They're definitely out and about. Possums struck by cars quite often. Sometimes the mother will have live babies in her pouch. So it's something to take a look at if you see one on the side of the road. You'll see movement in the pouch, indicate there's some babies there. You can call us. Possums, very beneficial. They eat carrion, and they also eat ticks. Different studies have shown they may eat as many as 1,000 ticks a week. So they're out there. As the ticks glom onto them, they groom them. So, all of us would prefer lower tick populations. So the possum is our ally in that respect. These guys, snapping turtles, very ancient species. Their predecessors lived alongside the dinosaurs. And springtime is a time when they're coming out of their home ponds, and they go cross country and lay their eggs somewhere. So we get lots of calls about these guys. We have people hit them on the road, sometimes intentionally. And we get a lot of calls about people who see this big snapper in their yard. And at that time, they're just looking for a nest, and they'll dig a hole, lay their eggs. Eggs don't hatch till August. Little silver dollar sized turtles will come to the surface and disperse. So you just want to let them continue that process. So a snapping turtle pre-exists humans and will be here when we're gone. The turtles we often get struck by cars. We repair the shells as needed. So if you get one of these guys behind the road, just get them in a box, dark, quiet, warm environment. And in many cases, we can epoxy the shell and send them back out into nature. Frogs on rainy nights, big deal. Anytime you have rain and a wetland, these guys will come out, particularly in spring and during the summer when it's been dry. They come out, and it's just in certain roads in our area, notably there's a couple of roads in Wilton that border wetlands. You'll just see this carnage at night because people aren't aware these frogs are coming out. So just in those kind of conditions, just keep your eyes out for these guys. Humane mousetraps, a very good one made by Safeguard Metal Industries. And you can trap them, relocate them. If you're going to relocate a mouse, you probably want to do at least a mile away from your home in a suitable habitat. Bears, get a lot of call about them. Not too many bears reproducing in our area in terms of this part of Fairfield County, but they're definitely out there. Pretty timid, not dangerous to humans. If you run across one, just clap your hands. They'll often just turn around and run away. They love bird feeders. They love sunflower seed and suet. So if you have a bear come into the feeder, you might just take the feeders in for a bit. We tend to feed birds through the spring into summer, so we do run into bear issues sometimes. But if you have a bear, just give us a call. We'll figure out a way to, deal with it in a humane fashion. Typically, just food source removal will cause him to go to a different location. But we think it's always pretty cool to have the bears. It's very exciting to have them back in our area, from our perspective. Recycling bins are problematic. Litter is problematic. Recycling bins often have traces of food, so your yogurt containers, jars, skunks, raccoons, they'll get their head into one of these jars, and very difficult to extricate. The Yoplait container is particularly pernicious because it tapers towards the opening, and animals are trying to get the yogurt in that last corner, and their head gets stuck. And getting a jar off a skunk's head is challenging, and you often get sprayed. So if you can avoid putting this stuff out, take out the recycling bin in the morning for collection rather than leaving it out the night before is a good idea. Fish hooks, very serious issue. A lot of fishermen seem to discard their line if it gets tangled, often leaving a hook or lure on it. You get seagulls, ducks, geese, swans. They find, they're foraging along and get these hooks caught in their beak. Sometimes it goes down their digestive tract, and they're barbed. So if they swallow a hook, surgery is required. So if you're walking in an area like that and you see a tangle of line, just pick it up. And encourage any fishermen in your family to take care and disposal of line and lures and hooks. Always good to be aware of ecological impact of our actions. So disposal plastic bottles. Any kind of poaching incidents. It's no longer hunting season. So if you're hearing gunshots, most likely a poacher. So call your animal control officer, your police department, or the state DEP. Bears that return to our area in numbers. So that's coyotes, bobcats, fishers. And they're here because good habitat. The reforestation in the Northeast is a great environmental success story. Probably Connecticut went from 70 to 80% deforested in 1900 to 70 to 80% forested now. But it's very fragmented. So, you got your roads, your housing developments, your malls, but you've got this forest. And that's why these species are returning. So you had the prey species, say deer, in a forest area, they're finding acorns to eat, other biomass. And 20 years later, we have the predators following right along. And it's a very good phenomenon because it creates a functioning ecosystem. So you've got your prey, you got your predators, and we have a role in this in terms of land preservation. That's why land trusts are favorite organizations. If you don't have habitat, you don't have wildlife. So saving land, preserving land, crucial for us going forward. And thank you. And we can talk, answer questions. I don't know what's time elapsed so far is. Can you still hear me?
Doing well, Peter. Absolutely. So are you ready to take some questions?
I sure can. What was the time elapsed so far?
So you're just about there. You have about, 10, 15 minutes if you'd like to.
Okay.
If you'd like to add anything else, start answering some questions, I'll leave that up to you.
Sure. I think that our individual properties, if you're a homeowner, you own a little patch of the earth, and you can create a hospitable environment for wildlife with a few tweaks here and there. So we talked about leaving trees if possible. Trees are so important for so many reasons. A basic green suburban lawn is kind of an environmental desert. And it's very popular around here, but it just doesn't support wildlife really. So, you know, if you can have your little patch of yard, but if you allow certain areas to be a little more rough, you know, thickets, anything like that, um, provides cover, food sources for animals. Uh, Brush piles are kind of anathema to homeowners, but you can create a brush pile. It's a great nexus for, you know, rodents, little birds. It gives them cover, protection, and creates a little more wild aspect to your yard, which is important. So combination of brush piles and a little thicket, or in some trees, uncut meadows are great habitat. So leaving part of your yard a little wild, a little rough, is very beneficial to wildlife. You know, you've got the seeds, you've got the nuts, you know, insects, all food sources. And you want to create some cover. That's important. A water source is great. If you have a natural water source, that's terrific. Bird baths are okay. You know, you can create a recirculating pool is if you don't have a natural water source. But to invite wildlife to your property, you know, they need food source, they need cover, they need water. So each of us can do that. You know, if you've got a little patch of earth that you own, and that makes a little refuge for animals. We do feed the birds all year round, so we find that definitely attracts wildlife. In certain environments, you know, if you have seed on the ground, you can attract more rodents than you might want. But we've generally found that natural predators will take care of any kind of excess rodent population. So you've got your hawks, you got your owls, and we really haven't had any issues with it. We didn't attract a lot of squirrels, but we do recommend feeding the birds through spring and early summer because they're nesting. It just, if they have a natural food source or a, you know, human provided food source, it allows them to, you know, feed their babies more efficiently. So in general, it's just better for them. So if you can continue to feed, we recommend it. And Pollinator Pathway is, you know, a great organization in terms of providing resources for, you know, talking about the native plants, because so often people are landscaping with non-native plants, and the native plants are evolved for life in this climate. There are certain plants that are beneficial in terms of producing seeds, and you know, it's nice to have, say, a crop of berries in the spring. So blueberries, blackberries, and then maybe some plant that will, like a fall fruit. So say apples, something like that. So you can actually tailor your yard in terms of providing food sources throughout the seasons, and so you attract different species and create kind of an oasis. I've talked to quite a few landowners over the years. You know, sometimes people have retired living alone, and they'll have this yard and they kind of allow it to go a little bit wild, and it adds richness to their lives in talking to them. And certainly we find that here. We're right in the woods, but it's if you are coexisting with nature harmoniously, I think it adds richness to your own life. You know, you're seeing these animals, you're helping them. You know, our suburban communities are a grid of roads and houses and stores, and it's very difficult for the animals to live and find refuge. And if you kind of create this little oasis for them, I think you'd find it's rewarding, and it's definitely beneficial for the animals. And you know, morally and ethically, it's the right thing to do. And I think certainly, at the very least, you'll get enjoyment from watching these animals on a daily basis. So that's one thing I wanted to stress.
And Peter, there are a whole lot of questions, and you may think of other things as some of these are
Okay.
questions coming through. So why don't we do a blend of that so you can
Sure.
put on your thinking cap, and people can start to inspire you with some of the questions that they have for you today. So you mentioned predatory animals, and one question is, what are the predatory animals for opossums?
Possums most often get them attacked by dogs. In terms of like native species, possums will play dead. They have a gland that exudes kind of an unpleasant odor. Occasionally owls will go after them, but most of the opossums we get have been attacked by dogs or cats. So that's, unfortunately, it kind of reemphasizes that earlier topic we talked about keeping cats inside and keeping dogs kind of under control. With the dogs, it can be difficult. We ended up kind of creating a 25-foot by 25-foot fenced area for our dogs, so they can come out, they run out, roaming freely, and particularly in spring, it's very common for a dog to tussle with one of these animals, like a possum or skunk, and that can be kind of catastrophic from the homeowner's perspective when you have this dog come running in, it's been skunked, and there's potentially issues with predators with pets. So, and we can talk about that if there's another question about it, but definitely keeping little dogs under your view or on a lead or in a fenced enclosure is very important in spring when coyote populations are very active. So.
Well, there's another question here. Is there a benefit to having cats wear a bell to warn birds or small mammals? Or is
Cats seem to be able to adapt to the bell. Like when I talk to cat owners, they'll put a bell on and they'll see the cat kind of turning his head in a funny way so the bell doesn't ring, and he does his stalking. And then some people put two bells on, which is possibly harder for them to adjust. But the bells, by all means, bell your cat. There was a product, it's like a colorful bandana type thing you put around the neck of the cat. And they did a study on that, and that seemed to reduce cat predation more than bells. And it makes the cat look a little ridiculous, but it's like a little bandana thing you put around the cat's neck. And so you could look at for that product and try it. But yeah, anything you do to, because cats, they're out, and a lot of these cats are hunting constantly. And it's, when we talk about 2 billion wild species killed every year in the US, it's just, say 30% of those are migratory birds, 30% amphibians, 30% rodents. So across the board, they're having an impact. And it's just as a cat owner, it's something I think you have to be conscious of.
Thanks, Peter.
Sure.
So there's another question about using cotton balls soaked with insecticide to control ticks.
I just don't know how effective that would be. I mean, there's, in general, you have to be careful with insecticide. I don't know if they've said what type of insecticide. That's an area that pollinator pathways been pretty good with. So there's all these organic pesticides that people are spraying, but these are still toxic. It's kind of an organic neurotoxin. So you gotta be very careful anytime you're talking about pesticide, because it can leach into the soil. And a lot of our towns, we're on wells. Certainly Weston, everybody's on a well, and some different towns have similar situations. And when you have a well, you have to be your own watershed manager. So if you're spraying stuff on the ground, eventually it's going to filter down into your own water supply. So you want to be just very careful about pesticide. We're all conscious about ticks. I wish you could have a little pet opossum that patrolled your yard every day and eat all the ticks. Guinea fowl supposedly are good tick predators, but it's definitely tick populations are growing. I think it's a function of warming climate, basically, and I'm not sure how effective that particular method would be.
Hey, Jean, could I just jump in for a second?
Please.
For the pollinator pathway group and the green corridor. So a lot of interesting developments about the use of the cotton balls with the insecticide is that they found that the bees were using the cotton for their nest building activities, and they were actually killing bees instead of
Oh
ticks.
gosh.
So actually, our Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station does not recommend the use of those. They're like cotton. They're tubes with cotton in them. That were supposed to be used by the mice for their nests, and then the mice don't get the ticks on them. So it kind of, but the problem was that the bees were going using the cotton. So there are tick boxes out there, which is another new development that has worked pretty well. And so the animals, the rodents they're not poisoned, and they don't carry anything out with them, and the bees don't get it. So a lot of smart people out there are coming up with some really good alternatives. And that's why we like to have Peter around to tell us some of these alternatives for our backyard. But yeah, so no go with the pesticides on the cotton.
There you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah, everything we do can have repercussions, and it just anytime you introduce toxic chemicals into your home environment, it's generally a bad idea.
So moving on to another question. Someone had a question about 50-degree overnight too. You had mentioned there was a certain temperature threshold that we hit in the spring, and talk a little bit more about that. Was it a 50-degree threshold at night, or just during the day, or at nighttime as well?
Threshold in terms of what?
Good question.
Oh, raking leaves.
Yes.
Okay. I would say holding off mid-May, if possible, would be best, because that should allow those species to disperse. Yeah, it's the early spring cleanups that really are devastating. So if you can hold off that long, it'd be great.
And there was another question about autumn leaves out of a water feature. The person asking was saying, gee, I'd like to pull last autumn's leaves out of my water feature with my hands. Is there a best time to do that so as not to disrupt sleepy amphibians or pull out their eggs?
Yeah, I would say May also, if you can wait that long. Because we have frogs reproducing right now, laying eggs. So it's late March. So I would say mid-May also for that.
Thanks, Peter. So we have a question. Someone is saying we have a wood duck house on the property that needs to be cleaned out in the spring. Sometimes they find baby squirrels in the duck house, and if we leave the squirrels, the wood ducks won't nest. What's the best course of action?
It's a tough one. I guess I'd mount another box. Because if you're taking the baby squirrels out, I mean, obviously squirrels are a very common species, but it's just from our perspective, each species has an equal right to exist. So, and you could maybe put a baffle on the box that would prevent squirrels from getting in. Sometimes you have, if the aperture is somewhat smaller, it might not work with the mother wood duck coming in. So providing other nesting areas might be a good idea. So and we recommend putting up various bird nesting houses in the spring anyway. And you can get squirrel boxes. There are templates on the internet, and you could just certain aperture hole and just put some of those around. So there's a place for everybody. And that might work. Just having more options.
Having more options. Thank you, Peter. So another question. We have a pair of nesting red-shouldered hawks on our property. Is there anything special we should do or look out for?
Well, they're feisty. So if you approach their nesting area in the spring, they will dive bomb you in some cases. They're the species most likely to do that. So I'd give them a wide berth. Usually people have issues when they're like walking within 20 feet of the nest or something. And soon enough, they'll be gone, like by midsummer. But it's, they're obviously a federally protected bird. And, but they are the hawk most likely to swoop down on you. Most of the other species are a little more reluctant to do that, but they're when we get calls about hawks dive bombing people on their property, it's usually the red-shouldered. So give them a wide berth, and it's generally a good thing to have hawks on your property. And they're definitely, you know, decimate the rodent population, which, in some cases, it's the circle of life. But yeah, not much you can do about it since they're federally protected in terms of spooking them or anything. Just let them do their thing and just vacate.
Thanks, Peter.
Good.
Another question. Someone was curious about identifying critters who live in the ground. And is there a guide to identifying who lives in the ground by the hole that they create?
Probably can tell. Like, bunnies, a scrape in the ground, lined with fur, covered with grassy material. It's bunnies. Woodchucks are the great burrower. So they're creating burrows. And then those burrows are often used by other species. So woodchucks like to burrow, particularly under sheds or decks, something like that. And then, since they're the great excavator, for example, fox will usually take over woodchuck burrow. So they'll go in the winter when the unfortunate woodchuck is hibernating, eat the woodchuck, and then take over the burrow. So if it's a large aperture hole, particularly under a shed or other structure, probably a woodchuck. And it just, sometimes you can't tell who's in there because this hole was originally a woodchuck burrow, but now someone else took it over. So they could send us a picture of the burrow. And these game cameras are really available and cheap. So you can actually get a good game camera for like $100 and, just see who's who out there pretty easily.
Fantastic. So there was, someone was mentioning that they have a lot of bamboo throughout a section of their yard near their condo unit. And the gardeners mow it as if it was grass, and the grass wasn't really growing well. But since there's a steeply sloped area to begin with, is the bamboo good for wildlife here?
Probably not. I mean, it's good for wildlife in, say, pandas in Asia. It provides cover. So yeah, I mean, we generally recommend leaving whatever natural cover is there. I mean, this is obviously non-native. So, it'd be better to maybe get rid of the bamboo and plant native grasses, perhaps. But if that's not feasible, I would just leave the bamboo. A woman called me the other day. She had a lot of marsh grass in her yard in the back. And there are deer coming every year to, reproduce, and the mother beds down her fawn. And she was going to cut all the marsh grass out because she was worried the deer would be in danger from the roads. And I said, well, they come every year. Obviously, they find that very attractive. Just leave the marsh grass. There's so little cover for wildlife in some of these suburban areas that anything is better than nothing.
Thank you.
Sure.
So, another question. Is it bad to feed animals? I've been putting out bread, peanuts, cereal, cat food, cookies for the possums and raccoons.
The bread, no one really can benefit from. It's basically nutritionally of zero value, so no on that. It's an interesting question. I mean, when you're feeding wildlife, it definitely benefits the individual animals, finding food in the spring. It can create a nexus where you're attracting predators and prey, which can be problematic, and can create a nexus of disease, for species that, distemper is something we've seen a lot of since maybe, say, 2014. And it's a viral infection that affects raccoons, skunks, fox, and it's aerosolized, so it's easily transmissible. And if you have a shared water source, it's possible to jump from animal to animal pretty easily. It's a personal choice. I mean, there's no law against it. It's generally discouraged for the reasons I cited, but it does help individual animals, and in certain habitats, situations might be beneficial to some species.
So we have about 6 or 7 more questions, and then we'll
Sure.
wrap up for everybody on the call here. One question here is, I work with bears. I've always liked to remind people, never run from a bear.
Yeah, the bears, generally with wildlife, you don't want to show fear. That's a prey response. And we are not prey. We're, you know, essentially run the planet for better or worse, and we're predators. So you behave in an assertive fashion. So anything, a bear, I've run across bears like face to face, you know, because they kind of prowl around our facility, and I come around a corner, there's a bear. And usually I just clap my hand and they take off. And they really want to avoid, most animals really want to avoid conflict with humans. And that's true right down the line. So coyotes, same deal, act assertive, make noise, take off. And those are the only two species that present any kind of issue. Bobcats usually take off. Sometimes when people find bobcats on a property, they're hunting something. So I've gone out and found a bobcat kind of prowling around a house, and there's a rodent nest there, and the bobcat will look at me very irritated because, you know, they're busy. And, you know, I mean, I usually just let them continue what they're doing. But most of these species, if you make some noise and behave in a assertive fashion, they'll take off. Bears, black bears kill 1 or 2 people in North America every year, but it's usually people who've done something really stupid. The most common thing now is these kids who want to take selfies with the bear, and the bear often misinterpret that. So don't do that.
Thanks, Peter. That's things you wouldn't have thought about. So what was the name of the humane mouse trap that you recommended?
Oh, Safeguard Metal Industries. It's a good trap. It's made in the United States, made of pressed steel, not too expensive, very effective, and easy to do the release. With the mice, you know, you do have to release them, say, a mile or more from where you are, or they'll come back. But it's a good trap, and usually if you're like trying to trap a little population, you find a suitable habitat at some distance. You want an area that's got, you know, water or shelter, like a stone wall or brush pile, and a little stream nearby or something. And then, you know, they can recreate their mouse society in a different location.
So 2 more questions. One question about woodchucks. Anything I can plant that woodchucks would like to
Oh
keep
yeah.
them away from my other flowers?
um, Succulent vegetables. Like, I mean, it's hard, you know, they're kind of ravenous in the spring, so they're going to eat everything, unfortunately. And clover, possibly.
Mm.
You know, nice cover that you don't care about, that they'll just kind of crop. Pretty much any kind of greens. And if there's a plethora of options, maybe they'll leave the flowers alone. I guess that's the best way. They love apples. I mean, you can feed them. So, and that won't really attract any other wildlife. So, you know, cut up a bunch of apples, throw an apple out there every day. That's pretty satisfying. Carrots, they love those too. So, you know, you can appease them with offerings. That's one option.
There we go. Another person was mentioning we have a large brush pile about now 15 feet high in a wooded part of our yard. Something's living in it. We don't mind, but wonder what it might be. We've seen woodchucks, foxes, deer, of course, coyotes who might seem to be only passing through, but not sure which might be actually nesting or living or visiting in this wood pile.
And well, I mean, look for tracks, any kind of aperture. I mean, the wood piles and the brush piles are great. I mean, not enough people have brush piles. So I'm encouraged by this, the height of that brush pile. That's really a great habitat for a lot of species, so that you have little birds that can nest in there safely, which is great. You do get some rodents that also, you know, but, you know, they're living in the brush pile, not in the house. And in terms of species, they live in the brush pile. I think it'd be more, I mean, you could have a woodchuck burrow under the brush pile. You know, they like overhead cover, and then you could have anything take over woodchuck burrow. But yeah, you can look for the tracks. Like I said, the game cameras are, you know, an option where it's kind of cool to see what's living in your yard, and that would definitely answer that question about this particular location.
And last question here. So I had mentioned response to your discussion about the the mousetrap. Curious about the electronic devices that emit a frequency that we can't hear, but what do you know about those types of?
The evidence is varied. I think it's worth trying. I mean, it's a relatively humane solution. And I'm not sure how effective it is, but it's worth trying because it's, as long as it doesn't drive your pets crazy, which it typically shouldn't because it's different frequency. But yeah, you might as well try it.
Fantastic. One of the people that offered that said, "Gee, it was very effective in 2 of her homes to try.
Oh, good.
It doesn't bother her dog." So that's great. Thanks so
Oh,
much.
yeah. No, by all means, if that works, that's terrific because that's a very humane solution.
And so coming to the end of this presentation, we're going to be passing it over to Mel in just one moment. We have one last question. Do you need any volunteers to help?
During the pandemic, we put our volunteer program on hiatus because we didn't have a lot of people coming up. But check the website, wildlifeincrisis.org, and there's a little volunteer tab on there. And we're starting our high school intern program again this year. And we'll be starting to think about volunteers very shortly. So yeah, by all means, reach out to us. We have a Facebook page, Wildlife in Crisis, and then an Instagram, and then the website, which has the little volunteer tab on it.
Terrific. Well, at this point, Peter, thanks so much. We're going to pass that right over to Mel and appreciate everybody's great questions today.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. What a great presentation, Peter. That was really fun. I took a lot of notes as always. So that was really wonderful. And so I encourage everybody to go to the Wildlife in Crisis website. It's just a great website. Help to support what they're doing, which is, a great service that they provide. And I've brought a few birds myself to them, and they've never turned anyone away. So thank you so much for what you do. I encourage people to also go to the Aspetuck Land Trust website. We have another program like this coming up. It's actually a brunch and learn on Sunday. Doug Tallamy is speaking and talking about his new book on oak trees. And Peter mentioned how critical oak trees are because they provide food for so much wildlife. So that's kind of a nice next step lecture for people after Peter's, is to listen to Doug Tallamy and get those oaks on your property. So,
Yeah.
So thank you, everybody. I wish you all a safe spring and live harmoniously with nature, and don't clean out your gardens until mid-May. I'm absolutely fine with that. So. So great. Thanks again. And for a great talk, Peter. Thanks for joining us for lunch today. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, everybody.
All right.
Have a good
Thank
day.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye.